Hi everybody! Congratulations on the 100th book club. It's an amazing accomplishment. I'm so proud of all of us. And I'm so sorry I can't be there, as many of you know. It's my brother's 60th birthday party up in upstate New York. So I'm out of town. And I'm especially bummed out because I love Lolita. It's a book I read many times throughout my life, especially in college. I studied Nabokov in college, and I studied with Alfred Appel Jr., who wrote the annotated Lolita. This is my book from college. You can see it's well worn. The back pages, the back cover is off, and you can see it says Balsam here. It said Eileen, but the corner's ripped off. Balsam's written kind of weird. I think maybe I was high or something. I don't know. 1982, and the book is completely marked up on the pages, which is what you do when you're an English major. Studying with the guy who wrote the annotated Lolita. If you didn't use this version, it's worth at some point taking a look at, because the whole back explains all the references and all the internal references and external references and all the internal threads throughout the whole book. It's really pretty cool. You don't have to read the notes as you're going, but you can read them at the end. So why is Lolita such an amazing and important book to me? Obviously, it's a horrible story, right? It's just a story about a pedophile. But it's the writing. It's the writing that's so special. And remember that Nabokov spoke Russian. He grew up in Russia and had to flee Russia. This is one, I don't know if it's the first book. Might be the first book that he wrote in English. He didn't write it in Russian and have it translated. He wrote it in English. And his commitment to the English language and his wordplay and the humor that goes through the whole book is just so remarkable, given that English was not his first language. But the importance of the writing, I think, falls into a bunch of categories. First and foremost, irony. The whole book is all about irony. Starting with the fact that he's in jail for killing Claire Quilty. He's not in jail for the crimes that he committed against Lolita. And throughout the book, there are just these incredibly ironic moments. He calls himself a poet and not a criminal. He talks about how he's a good father and he's reading up on, on child rearing. There's the scene in Beardsley where he's confronted by Mrs. Pratt about Lolita's supposed sexual immaturity, which he has, pretty hilarious conversation with her. And then really sickeningly proceeds to find Lolita in the library and bribes her to give him a hand job under the table. But in any event, irony pervades the entire book, as does humor. I found parts of this book when I read it the first time and reading it again just completely hilarious. Even at the very beginning, the scene in his first wife's house when he's confronted by her lover, and he's just much more obsessed with the fact that the lover peed in the toilet and didn't flush the toilet than the fact that his wife was admitting to infidelity and leaving him. There are other just really hysterical parts of the book, even when he's describing his overwhelming lust or the predicaments he gets himself into. But the scene where he kills Claire Quilty, I think is one of the funniest scenes in all of literature. First of all, he's running around the house shooting him dozens of times. But at one point, there's a part where they're fighting with each other. And he says, "We rolled all over the floor in each other's arms like two huge, helpless children. He was naked and goatish under his robe, and I felt suffocated as he rolled over me. I rolled over him. We rolled over me. They rolled over him. We rolled over us." I don't know. That still cracks me up. When I read it the first time, I had to read it over and over again because I thought it was so funny. The other thing I wanted to, so you've got the humor, but then you also have the American landscape itself. And throughout the book, the landscape is juxtaposed against the horror of the story. And you don't know whether Nabokov is commenting kind of like on the crassness of the United States and of all these places that you see on the road, like the Corn Palace and the Duck Duck Ranch and places like that. But there's a moment of truth toward the end of the book where he talks about how on his travels with Lolita, he's defiled the American landscape, and that all he had left when he thought about it was how he defiled the landscape, how they had, torn up maps and used maps, and the memory of her crying every single night. So I think, he uses the landscape both as, equal to the crassness of what's happening, but then he also puts it up against what he's done and feels that he has defiled the American landscape as well. And there are other themes in there, right? Like his Dolores was attracted to him because he was European, seemed to think that was all, classy and stuff. Again, irony, of course, it was not. He's the horrible, classless human being. So the other theme I'll just mention quickly is the concept of the unreliable narrator, which if you pick up any treatises on Lolita, they always talk about that, because Humbert can't be believed, right? But there, in my opinion, there are moments of complete truthfulness, but for the most part, can you really believe him? Do you really think that his first wife ended up in some experiment on all fours, sniffing out food or something like that? I don't even know what that was all about. Or do you believe even that Lolita seduced him, which he says, when he picks her up from camp? But there are moments of absolute, total truthfulness, like when he talks about how he defiled the landscape of the United States or of America, or when he admits several times that every night after she thought he was asleep, she would be sobbing. And when he says something like, I let my lust and my obsession ruin her life. So although he's an unreliable narrator, I think at times he really is quite reliable. And then the last thing I'll just comment on is the overall structure of the book that starts with the foreword by John Ray, who's his fictional character himself. And he talks about how the book is, we should use the book to learn about morality. But at the end of the book, Nabokov writes his own piece and says, kind of like, that's bullshit. This is just a story where I had the idea, I came up with the language, and it came up with my way of telling the story, and that's all it is. So I think you put all those things together, and to me, you have an incredibly classic, engaging novel that you wonder why at times you find yourself rooting for Humbert. Maybe once in a while you do. Maybe at the end when he goes to see her and he's crying and crying. And do you find yourself complicit? The only times I would say it felt, a little bit complicit was I also hated Claire Quilty and somehow found myself among two evils rooting for Humbert. But in the end, of course, he's a horrible, miserable human being who ruined someone's life and was captured in this incredible novel. So sorry for the long video. I hope you guys have a great night. Love you all, and I'll see you next month. Mwah.